Thank you, David and Todd and Kent. Boy, powerful song. I see so many of you, like me, one of your favorites, I could tell. It's kind of an antithesis to what I'm going to be talking about today. And I think it reflects what happens when we are in the silence in the outer, but not in the inner. In the outer, we are sometimes ignoring what is reality, ignoring that voice of spirit that needs to be heard. But when we go within in silence, it is there that we find our truth. This week, we wrap up our series on the gifts of winter. And it feels kind of ironic since we really haven't had a whole lot of winter this year. And yet, we know there is something we can always learn from nature. So over the last 5 weeks, we have looked at the gifts of winter, the joy of rest, the wisdom of nature. Last week, embracing our shadow. And today, the sound of silence. Winter, in some climates anyway, is the season of silence, of deep, quiet snows, of sleeping creatures deep in their burrows. Winter is a time for us to embrace the silence, whether it be a winter of a season or a time of winter in our experiences, a time when we find that it is beneficial to go within, to sit in silence. We are not a people who are wired to do that. I'll be talking more about that in a few minutes. We are not wired. Actually, I'm going to talk about it right now. We are not wired. We are not wired to be still, to be quiet. All around us is a cacophony of sound. If it's not radios and TVs and our earbuds, I was going to say MP3s, but that's kind of already dated. If it's not that, it's just the sound from our cities, the hum of automobiles, of planes, of the noise of civilization. Silence is becoming harder and harder to find. But there is one place where we can always find it, and that is within. Joel Goldsmith, in his powerful book called The Thunder of Silence, wrote, "Silence, the healing consciousness, is not an absence of sound, but a state of consciousness that enables us to refrain from mental reaction to what is seen or heard." Powerful, powerful sentence. I'm going to say it again. Silence, the healing consciousness, is not an absence of sound, but a state of consciousness that enables us to refrain from reaction, mental reaction, and sometimes physical, to what is seen or heard. Amen. E.V. Ingram said this: "The silence is clearly taught in all the world's scriptures and is one of the most vital aspects of prayer. Be still and know is a clear command to let the mind rest from its own activities and record knowledge that the infinite waits to reveal." The most powerful thing we can do when we don't know what to do is to become still and silent, for that is when answers come. Oftentimes in my life, I have been faced with difficult decisions, and I have found that if I take time before I even think about how or what I am going to do, if I take time in the silence, the answers come, and they come clearly. What happens when one spends time in the silence? What happens is we tune out the outer. It's still there. We don't have to be in a place of total silence. We can tune that out. In meditation, there's a technique where if you are meditating and you hear a sound that distracts you, you acknowledge it, because it means your ears and your brain are working. Good news. And you say, thank you, ears, thank you, brain. And then you go back in and you let it go. Silence is powerful, especially if you can spend more than a few seconds in it. There's a website called dailygood.com where a former monk shares insights from a year he spent in solitary prayer and contemplation. He was not in a silent place, but he got to a silent place within himself for a whole year. How many of you could be silent for a year? Yeah, not me either. I promise you, it would not happen. I did 3 days once. That was hard. So he writes, what happens when one is silent for a prolonged period? The outer noise goes first, and then the inner noise starts to evaporate. And soon quiet reigns everywhere, it seems. Actually, there was a time in my life where I was out in nature for almost 9 months. And one of the things that really was hard to readjust to, it was when I hiked the Appalachian Trail, if you're wondering. One of the things that was hard to readjust to was the noise of civilization. It was almost deafening at first. But in the silence, the outer noise goes first, and then the inner noise starts to evaporate. And soon quiet reigns everywhere, it seems. The monk goes on. Time slows to a crawl. Sound becomes a curiosity. Natural sounds especially, like the flow of water or the rustle and sway of tall grass. They become occasions for deeper listening and lead to a most profound and inner calm. The greatest lesson I ever learned in the monastery was how to get in touch with my spiritual center. For deep within each of us is a great well of health, abundance, knowledge, and guidance. And when we enter the silence and can stay in the silence for any length of time, we come in direct contact with that sacred well. It is there that our true self dwells. It is that part of us that exists and operates in a place where there is no time, no past, no future, only the present. It is that part of us that is connected to all of consciousness. This spiritual center is active in us always, and it will communicate with us if we are still enough to hear its gentle voice. So how do we do that? How do we do that in this world of busyness, in this world of constant sensory input? How do we do it? We take a breath and we turn within. And we say, thank you, God, for sound. Thank you for the sound of life happening around us, like our children. Thank you. Because silence is not out there. Silence is in here. When we do that, we discover that still small voice within may not arise in the form of words. It may come as an idea that you had never thought of before, in the image of something or someone. Often the voice will not come to you in the silence, but afterwards, and when you least expect it, it might arise in the middle of a conversation you are having with someone. It may appear as a satisfying conclusion to a personal event. We don't know always how God is going to respond, but we do know that God responds. In the 12 Powers, Charles Fillmore wrote, "The purpose of silence is to still the activity of individual thought so that the still small voice of God may be heard." Silence speaks truth to us and speaks the truth we need to know in that moment. Silence is one of the most profound spiritual practices you can do and one of the easiest. So as I said before, how do we do it? Here are the practical steps of how you can develop a practice of being in the silent. Now, in this article that I read on how to do this, it says to spend an hour in the silence a day. For many people, that's not going to be possible, at least not at first. Start with a minute. How many times in life have we ever been in a place where we don't even spend a minute in the silence? What if we could spend 60 seconds in the silence. Here's how you do it. Schedule your silence at a particular time every day. Make it a habitual practice. During that time, turn off the phone, TV, radio, computer, and all other appliances and communication devices. Put down your books, your phones, and other distractions. Light a candle to be your witness in your hour of, or in however long your silence is. Then sit quietly and rest. You may choose to look at an object like the candle or something from nature. Or you can engage in work that does not require you to hear, see, or express words, such as, I love this one, gentle housekeeping. That would not be mine. Gardening, walking in nature, and then listen to the sound of silence. Listen. Stay in the present moment. Breathe deeply and mindfully, and bring in the silence as you expel mental noise. And at the end of that time, let your first word be an expression of gratitude or love. And then get up and go about your day. Why is silence so good? Carolyn Gregor writes, "We live in a loud and distracting world where silence is increasingly difficult to come by, and that may be negatively affecting your health. In fact, a 2011 World Health Organization report called Noise Pollution a Modern Plague, concluding that there is an overwhelming evidence that exposure to environmental noise has adverse effects on the health of a population. We are constantly filling our ears with music, TV, radio news, games, podcasts, and of course, the multiple sounds that we create nonstop in our own heads. Think about it. How many times each day do you spend in total silence? The answer is probably very few. As our internal and external environments become noisier and noisier and louder, more people are beginning to seek out silence, whether through a practice of sitting quietly in the morning or heading off to a 10-day silent retreat. I love it when I go out in nature and I'm camping and you hear all these beautiful sounds of nature, and somebody comes along with earbuds blasting music. It's like, why'd you leave home? So are you inspired to go out and find peace and quiet? Well, here are 4 science-backed ways that show how silence is good for your brain. Number 1, it makes you less stressed, more focused, more creative. It relieves tension. Florence Nightingale, the 19th century British nurse and activist, wrote, "Unnecessary noise is the most cruel absence of care that can be inflicted on the sick or the well." She argued that needless sounds cause distress, sleep loss, and alarm for recovering patients. And it turns out, modern science has shown that high noise pollution leads to high blood pressure and heart attacks, as well as impairing health and hearing and overall health. It raises our stress levels by activating the amygdala, causing release of the stress hormone cortisol. A 2004 paper by environmental psychologist Dr. Craig Zimring says that higher noise levels in neonatal intensive care units lead to elevated blood pressure, increased heart rates, and disrupted sleep in the children that are there. A 2006 study published in the journal Heart found that 2 minutes of silence is more powerful than listening to relaxing music. How powerful is silence spiritually? Spiritually, it is when we are in that silent place that we are filled with the truth that is always within us. When we become aware of our divinity. When we become aware of our humanity as well. It is in the silence that we receive an infilling of energy from the divine. Because we get this out of the way so that what is in here can flow forth. Charles Fillmore didn't spend a lot of time at any one time in meditation. His practice was to meditate often throughout the day, sometimes for a minute, sometimes for 5 minutes. I shared with you a story a couple weeks ago. For those of you who are not here, I'll share it with you again. He had a habit of when he was working at his desk, writing articles or doing whatever, he would stop and just become silent. And Charles and Myrtle were parents. They had little kids, and one day the kids were playing, and they had their friends over, and one of the kids go, "Is there something wrong with your dad? Every time I look at him, he's asleep." He was listening to the still, small voice within. There's another thing that happens when we spend time in the silence. We tap into our brain's default mode network. It is activated by when we engage in what scientists call self-generated cognition. Sometimes it's called daydreaming, or meditating, or just letting our minds wander. How many of you, like me, was accused many times when we were children of being a daydreamer? I'm the only one? Really? Okay, well, as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the highest compliments you can give a child. Because dreams lead to reality manifestation. Everything starts in mind. Everything starts with a dream. It is when we are disengaged from external stimulation that we can finally tap into our inner stream of thoughts, of emotions, of memories, and of ideas. It allows us to bring meaning out of our experience, to empathize with others, and to be more creative in our daily lives. But in order to do that, we have to break away from the distractions. As Herman Melville once wrote, all profound things and emotions of things are preceded and attended by silence. Science has also proven that when we spend time in silence, we actually regenerate brain cells. A 2013 study indicated that ambient noise, white noise, things like that, actually healed brains in rodents that they were using for these experiments. Science is now saying that when there is brain damage, silence can heal it. You know, at one time we thought the brain could not grow new cells. We now know that is not correct. So in conclusion, silence is where healing happens. What was funny? Oh, see, I was tuning it out. That's what you do. Noise is going to happen. But when you're in the silence, you're not attached to it. Where was I? Silence is where healing happens. Silence is where creation happens. Think about the original translation of Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and empty, and a great stillness reigned over the earth. A great stillness. And out of that great stillness, creation came. In The Deepest Silence by John Roger Barry, he writes, "The eloquence of the deepest silence echoes from the eternal. To the mystic, silence is the ground, the core of reality. All else relates to and emanates from the silence. The deeper elements in all religions point to this silence. It is God. It is Buddha. It is Allah. It is the Christ. But to paraphrase Lao Tzu, to name it is to elude its essence. It can only be experienced." St. Caber wittily observed, "I laugh when I hear the fish in the water is thirsty." This paradox, which asserts that we are forever surrounded by silence, yet all the while occluded to existence, forms the key dilemma in our spirituality. How can we not experience that which always envelops us? How can we not do it? We cannot do it if we are focused on the outer. There is a time and a place to be focused on the outer, but there is also a time and a place to go within, to the heart. Mother Teresa wrote, "See the stars, the moon, and the sun, how they move in the silence. We need silence to touch our souls." So spend some time in the coming days, even if it is only for 1 minute. Spend some time in the silence, and you will touch your soul. Namaste.